Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I hope that you're well. It's Rabbi Akiva Males, and today is Wednesday. It is the 14th of September. We're getting ready for Parshas Savo, and we're going to be sharing some nice Divrei Torah today on the Parsha. So let's jump right in. I've got the source sheet on the screen. And there are a number of items that come up in the Parsha, and I'm going to share a couple with you that I hope will grab your attention. The first item comes up, and I think we'll recognize it from the Pesach Haggadah. The Pesach Haggadah, much of the text, the conversation in the Pesach Haggadah, where we go over the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim, our national story, is taken from this Parsha. Believe it or not, the speech that is made when someone brought Bikurim, they would bring their first fruits in the Beis HaMikdash. That speech forms the basis of the Haggadah Shel Pesach. And what ends up happening is that we go through it pasuk by pasuk, verse by verse, and then they darshan on it. If you don't recognize it, let's take a look inside. So it's in Perek Chaf Vav 26, and it says as follows: Pasuk Daled, V'lakacha kohen atenami yadecha. So I'm bringing my basket full of first fruits to the Beis HaMikdash. The kohen takes that basket from my hands. And he places it before the Mizbeach. Hey, you shall call out and say before Hashem your God, an Aramean, someone who was an Aramean sought to destroy my father, as a result of that, he went down to Egypt, and he sojourned there with a small number of people. He was there he became a great, mighty, and numerous nation. Look at the next psukim, you'll recognize these. The Egyptians were terrible to us there. They treated us cruelly, they afflicted us. They put on us very hard labor. Zion, when we cried out to God, who's the Lord of our ancestors, God heard our voices. He saw our suffering, our affliction. All of our toil, and our oppression. And God took us out of Egypt. With a strong, mighty hand, of outstretched arm, with great awe, with signs and wonders. And he brought us to this place. And he gave us this land, which is flowing with milk and honey. Those are the psukim. And again, you recognize those because in Magid, in the Haggadah, that's the basis of our story. And then we darshan, we expound on each of those psukim. Look back at pasuk Hey, the fifth pasuk, and I've got part of it highlighted. Not highlighted, bolded. We say, Arami Oved Avi, an Aramean oppressed or tried to destroy my father, Vayered Mitzrayim, and as a result of that, he went down to Egypt. So who is this Arami? So Rashi tells us, if you look at Rashi, he's really working with a Gemara. It's a Yerushalmi. The Gemara says as follows, that Rashi quotes, Arami Oved Avi, when the person makes this speech, this statement that an Aramean tried to destroy my father, Mazkir Chaste Hamakom. He's mentioning, he's declaring the kind deeds of God. Arami Oved Avi, he's saying that an Aramean sought to destroy my father. Who is this Aramean? Lavan, the father-in-law of Yaakov, the father of Rachel and Leah. Lavan, he was Arami, he was an Aramean. So Lavan bikesh la'koras hakol. Lavan tried to destroy everything. How? Kisharadaf achar Yaakov. When he pursued Yaakov after he left and on his way back to Israel, he pursued. And the Torah is telling us that what was his intent? His intent was he was going to commit genocide. He was going to knock out, even though these were his daughters and his grandchildren. He was so mad. He was so infuriated at Yaakov for leaving so abruptly. And he had accused him of stealing his idols. And then also he thought all of the wealth that he had gotten was all his. So he was going to just wipe them out. That was his mindset. Now, what the Gemara is bothered by, okay, but look at the word of the pasuk. The pasuk says, Arami Oved Avi, an Aramean destroyed my father. Now, we explain that to mean he wanted to destroy, sought to destroy. But why does the verse say it that he did it? He didn't do it. He wanted to do it. So Rashi, quoting the Gemara, says as follows: B'shvil shechashav lasos, because that's what he wanted to do. Chashav lo hamakom ki'ilu asa. God considered it as if he had already done it. She'umos olam, when it comes to the pagan nations of the world, choshev lam hakadosh baruch hu machshava ra k'maisa. God considers their evil plans as if they've already done it, and he holds them accountable. Whereas with Bnei Yisrael, he only holds us accountable for that what we've done. When it comes to the pagan nations of the world, he'll consider it as if they've done it just because that was their plans. That's what they wanted to do. That's what the Gemara says. That's a very difficult concept to understand. How does God consider someone's plans, even if it's a pagan? God's just. How does God consider their plans as if they've done it and hold them accountable? That's for a different discussion. But what's clear from this Gemara that Rashi's quoting is that the clear understanding of Arami Oved Avi, who is this Arami? It's Lavan. It's talking about Lavan. Now, I want to share with you a Divrei Torah that I heard back when I was in elementary school. It was either fifth grade, fourth, fifth, or sixth grade. I don't remember which grade. And it made such an impression on me. I remember it every year Pesach time. But I don't remember who said it. I know that my Rabbi in school taught it to us, and when he was giving us Divrei Torah for Pesach, but I couldn't remember who said it. And then I chanced on it this year. And it brought back such warm feelings because I remembered this Divrei Torah. I loved it. I think that our school had a model Seder that year, and I was chosen to give a Divrei Torah for that part of the Seder, and this was the Divrei Torah that I gave over. It's amazing what stays in the memory. So if you look at the part I bolded in Pasuk Hey, it says, Arami Oved Avi, the Arameans sought to destroy my father, and Rashi told us that person is identified as Lavan. Lavan is the Arami, and he tried to destroy Yaakov. Now, as a result of that, Vayered Mitzrayim, that's why Yaakov goes down to Egypt. It sounds as if we are pinning Yaakov's descent to Egypt on the fact that Lavan tried to destroy him. Somehow or another, Lavan is responsible for the fact that Yaakov went down to Egypt. And there's a very obvious question. What does Lavan have to do with this? The reason why Yaakov went down to Egypt was because of Mechiras Yosef, was because Yosef was sold. If you're trying to blame Lavan for all the stuff we know he clearly committed, the crimes he committed, the cheating he did. But where do we get off blaming Lavan for something that he seemingly doesn't have any involvement in? He didn't seem to be involved in the reason why our ancestors went down to Mitzrayim. Yet that's what the pasuk seems to say. Arami Oved Avi, and Aramean tried to destroy my ancestor. Vayer Mitzrayim, as a result of that, we went down to Egypt. That's the question. So I was so happy that I saw in Sefer Torah Ladas, he brings us down. This was my Dvar Torah from the model Seder in either fourth, fifth, or sixth grade. I don't remember, but it made such an impression on me. I remember every Pesach I think about this. So here it is inside. Let's look at it. In Sefer Torah Ladas, he brings it down in the name of the Al-Shech, one of our great Achronim. Arami Oved Avi Vayered Mitzrayim Makshim Olam. We're on page 2. Everybody asks, all the commentaries to the Torah ask the following question. Ma kasher ben shnei ha'ma'amarim ha'eleh. What's the connection between this? What's the connection? Just because Lavan tried to destroy me, that's why we went down to Egypt? What does Lavan have anything to do with why we went down to Egypt? Ha'al-Shech Mefarish, the famous Al-Shech. So this is again one of our great Achronim. He says as follows: Shebema shenasan Lavan leYaakov es Leah b'makom Rachel. What caused us to go down to Egypt? How do you pin this on Lavan? There was one seminal event. Lavan switched Leah and Rachel. Yaakov thought he was going to marry Rachel. And what did Lavan do? Lavan, the cheater, he switched. And he had Lavan marry Yaakov that time. What did that cause? Garam she Yosef, that ended up causing that Yosef, who was Yosef's mother, was Rachel. Yosef was the firstborn of Rachel. If Yaakov would have married Rachel, who would have been the firstborn? Would have been Yosef. But what happened? Yaakov didn't marry Rachel first. He married Leah. And as a result of that, everything got mixed up. Look what he says here. So by the fact that Lavan switched Rachel and Leah, Garam, he caused Yosef, that Yosef, Yosef, who was supposed to have been the Bechor, Bein b'machshava, Bein b'maisa, whether Lavan intended this or not, Bechor rak b'machshava v'lo b'maisa. Yosef just ended up being thought of as the Bechor. Yaakov always loved him so much. He loved him extra special. He treated him special. He gave him that ksonas pasim. He treated him like the Bechor, but he wasn't the real Bechor. Yosef was not the real Bechor. Reuben was the Bechor. But Yaakov kept treating him like the Bechor because he was supposed to marry Rachel. Rachel was the bride that he had intended for. That was the one that he wanted. And as a result of not having Rachel as his initial bride, Yosef was not the physical Bechor. But Yaakov still treated him that way. Since Yaakov loved Yosef so much and he treated him like the Bechor, even though he really wasn't the Bechor, he adds in parentheses, even though he wasn't the Bechor in actuality, that caused the brothers to be tremendously jealous of him. And that's what ended up causing our ancestors to go down to Egypt. They hated Yosef. They resented Yosef because they're saying, why is Yaakov treating him so special? Had he been the Bechor, it would have all been understandable. They said, okay, he's a Bechor. He deserves some kind of extra special treatment. But Yosef wasn't the Bechor. So why is he treating him this way? But whose fault is it that Yosef's not the Bechor? It's Lavan's. Because Lavan switched Rachel and Leah. In Cain, if so, Kivan Sharami Yovid Avi, since Lavan had it out and he was messing with our father, with Yaakov, Al Yedei Shema Saras Leah Yaakov. By the fact that he gave Leah to Yaakov, Kodem Rachel, before he gave him Rachel, Memela Yosef Loya Bechor B'maisa. As a result of that, Yosef wasn't the real Bechor. Zegaram, that ended up causing Shevayered Mitzrayim. That ended up causing that we went down to Egypt. I was so happy to see this because, again, I remembered learning this in elementary school. And this was the Divrei Torah that I said over at our model Seder at school in either 4th, 5th, or 6th grade. I don't remember which of those three. It was one of those three. I was so excited. I loved this Divrei Torah. And every year on Pesach, I would always think about that ever since. But I forgot. My Rabbi taught it to us. Where did it come from? I don't know. Did he make it up on his own? And all of a sudden this year I saw it in the Torah Ladas, and he says it in the name of the Alshach. So that made me very excited. Okay, that's Divrei Torah number 1 I wanted to share with you. Divrei Torah number 2, 2 prakim later, we find ourselves in the middle of the Tochacha, very harsh form of warnings that we're finding in the Torah, in Savo. We find it twice in the Torah. We find it in Bechukosai, in the end of Sefer Vayikra, and we also find it in Savo, in Devarim, in Sefer Devarim, where Moshe repeats to everybody the warnings from Hashem about what would happen if we did not live up to our end of the agreement, of the covenant that we entered into with Hashem, keeping our end on the national level to observe the Torah and the mitzvahs. And there's all sorts of dire warnings, very frightening warnings. Let's take a look at one of them here. The pasuk says, Yolech Hashem oscha. So if we really desist from our responsibilities and we're not living up to our end of the agreement, God will cause, he will lead us, Bes Malkacha, and your king, Asher Takim Alacha, that you appoint on yourselves, El Goy Asher Lo Yadata, Atav Avasecha. He's going to lead you off to be slaves in some foreign land to a people that neither you or your ancestors knew of. V'yadvadat Hashem, and you will serve them there as slaves, and there you will serve rather Elohim Acherim. There, I should not have taken out that hey. That's Elohim Acherim. That's talking about false gods, meaning idols. Elohim Acherim Eitz V'Aven. You will serve other deities that are made of wood and stone. So he's saying that we're going to go off into Galus, and while we're there, we're going to serve idols. One more pasuk, Lamed Zayin, Vayisel Shama, and there you will become an object of astonishment. L'mashal L'shnina, an example, a topic of discussion, meaning everyone is going to be pointing at us, and we're going to be despised in that foreign land. Amongst all the people that God is going to have lead over us there, we're going to be mistreated. So we're going to worship those false idols in that land. People are going to look at us. Everyone's going to say, wow, what did that people do? Oh, those are the people that rejected God. That's why they were despised. And they're going to give us a tough time. Look what else Sefer Torah Ladas brings down. He brings down something fascinating that I think we'll be able to find so many historical examples of. It says, Ve'avadat Hashem Elohim Acherim. He says that when you're foreigners in this land, there you will serve false gods. Eitz V'Aven, made idols made out of wood made out of stone. Va'isal shama l'mashal l'shina. You'll serve as an example, a topic of discussion. You'll be mocked by all the people there. All the people who are going to lead you there. Okay. The Sefer Biuro Rabbeinu Chaim Volozhin. So there's a Sefer that's out there of Rav Chaim Volozhin, I guess some of his Divrei Torah on the Parsha. So they bring down, the students of Rav Chaim Volozhin bring the following idea down. Muva Maisa Zeh Mipi Rav Yisrael Stam Zatzal Mekelm. I don't know who this is. They're quoting Rabbi Yisrael Stam from Kelm. I don't know. Again, this must have been a student of Rav Chaim of Volozhin. It says as follows: Mishumad Echad, there was an apostate, meaning someone who had abandoned Judaism and converted to a different religion. Mishumad Echad, Hisonen Lefnei Gon Rav Chaim of Volozhin. An apostate once met up with Rav Chaim Volozhiner, and he started to complain. He was suffering mercilessly. He was being bullied by the Christians around him, all of his neighbors. They were making fun of him. They were mocking him. And therefore, because of all their mocking, he started to eat with them, thinking, okay, the more alike they see that I am, the less they'll bother me. So what did he do? He started eating with them. That didn't help. They still mocked him. He started to befriend them in every way possible. And to desecrate the Shabbos publicly, to show them, I'm with you, I'm one of you, I'm not on Team Jewish, I'm on your team. And it still didn't help. Eventually he converted. So here was this fellow, he didn't start as an apostate. He started as someone who was disenfranchised from the Jewish people. His Christian neighbors mocked him. So he kept saying, okay, I'll take a step closer, Keep thinking that'll finally get them to start loving me and embracing me and treating me like a brother. And it never worked until finally he converted to Christianity, thinking, okay, that'll finally win them over. So at the end, he became an apostate. But Gamzelo, they still mocked him and called him the Jew and made fun of him. So he was complaining to Rav Chaim, what happened? I thought that by assimilating and by being and emulating and doing everything I could to be like my non-Jewish neighbors, that would cause them to love me. I even converted. And what happens? They still mock me. So they asked Rav Chaim Volozhiner, how do you explain this? So look what it says. Amar lo agon Rav Chaim. Rav Chaim says, he says, it's not such a kasha. It's not such a question. This is exactly what the Tochacha was talking about. Look at our psukim. It says, it says you'll go into Galus and you'll start to worship idols made out of wood and stone. And then it says, even after you're worshiping their idols, that everyone, all of those nations, all those Gentiles will continue to mock you. Meaning, what he's saying is that's another way to read our pasuk. The plain way to read our pasuk is, we'll go into exile, we'll start worshiping idols, and then the nations, everyone will stand out. Will stand out and everyone will point a finger. Look what happens to an accursed people like those Jews because they went against the Torah. Rav Chaim was reading the psukim a little bit more creatively. But he was saying, you'll go into exile, you'll worship idols, and then they'll mock you. Meaning what? Don't think by assimilation, now all of a sudden the nations of the world are going to love us. Don't think that we become an apostate and wow, now they're going to just welcome us with open arms. Even after that, we're always going to be that outsider. That's just part of our lot. As Am Levadad Yishkon, as Bilam said, we're that nation that's going to dwell apart. No matter how much we want to try to shed that Jewish look, the Jewish practices that we have, it's not going to work. We still will be mocked as those outsiders, as those Jews. Even if we become apostates, we still will never be fully accepted. There are so many historical precedents of this, of Jews throughout history, whether it's Jews in mass or Jewish individuals, that thought that their ticket to the broader society was by shedding all their Jewish trappings. And it may have worked to some degree, but ultimately it didn't. They were never fully accepted, even with converting. I think the most famous example that comes to mind is the Spanish expulsion in 1492. Jews were given a choice. right? The Catholic leaders of Spain decided that no one was to live in the Spanish kingdom if they weren't Catholic. So everyone else was given the choice, either convert or leave. So many Jews left. Now, leaving wasn't simple. You couldn't take all your assets, all your resources with you. So there was plenty of Jews who decided to stay back and to play that they were Christians, play that they converted, that they meant it, that they were sincere. But that was not real. They didn't mean it. They were just putting on a show. And they were called the conversos. They were called the anusim in Hebrew. You know what the Spanish called them? Spanish called them Marranos. And I didn't know this as a kid, but Marranos was a Spanish derogatory term for swine. That meant that even after these guys converted and they were saying, okay, we're new Christians, now all of a sudden they were basically treated like second-class citizens. They were called Marranos. They still didn't accept them into society, even though they had converted and given up, they had broke with their Jewish ties. They were not fully accepted into society, and they were called Marranos, and now they were subject to the Inquisition. The Inquisition was the office set up by the church to persecute, was not to persecute, first was to investigate, was to see that all these conversos, all these new Christians, people who had taken on the faith, were they still retaining any of their heretical practices from their prior religions? So someone who never converted was not subject to the office of the Inquisition. But once someone had converted, now all of a sudden they've got to answer to the Inquisition. So here it is that this huge chunk of Jews in Spain thinking that, okay, assimilation and then conversion, apostasy, that'll get them to finally be accepted. To the contrary, now they were treated like second-class citizens. They were constantly scrutinized. They were watched like hawks by the Inquisition, and they were labeled as Marranos, which was a put-down. That was a derogatory term. I think we can find many examples throughout history, both in a mass movement and in an individual movement. And again, even people that it may have looked like it worked for a while, that they were accepted for a while, when push came to shove, they were still reminded of those Jewish roots, and they were treated as an outsider, never fully being accepted by their non-Jewish hosts as being on the same page and one of them. All right, let's take a look at the last item I want to share with you today. This is a fascinating item, and it's going to bring up a tragic piece of Jewish history, but it's fascinating, but it's tragic. But there are lessons from this that continue to be learned to this very day. So let's take a look. We're on page 3. In the Tochacha, in this rebuke and in these warnings that Moshe Rabbeinu gives us this week, we see the following. He says, Banim uvanos tolid, that we will have sons and daughters, v'lo yulach, but we won't be able to have them, to enjoy them and to raise them, ki yelchu bashevi, because they'll be taken as captives, meaning our conquerors will take all of our Jewish children. They'll take them from us. Terrible, terrible situation. And they'll go and be sold as slaves. Let's take a look at a Mishnah in Maseches Gittin. The Mishnah tells us, and this was once a just day-to-day reality in the ancient world, and sadly there are parts of the world where this continues to pop up, and that is the concept of pidyon shvuyim, redeeming captives. In South America, this happens all the time. There are Jewish communities in South America that shuls have once again established pidyon shvuyim funds, because drug cartels are kidnapping people, not that they want to kill them, but for business. They'll kidnap them and then charge the community X amount of dollars to get them back. So shuls are once again creating pidyon shvuyim funds, redemption of captain funds. You never would have imagined this would still be going on in the 21st century. But here's what the Mishnah teaches us in Maseches Gittin. Ein podin es hashvuyim yoser al kedei demeyan. Jewish community is not allowed to redeem captives beyond the going market price. Meaning if they're being charged an exorbitant fee for ransom, you're not allowed to pay that ransom. Why? Mipnei tikun ha'olam, to better the world. What does that mean, mipnei tikun ha'olam? So let's look how the Rambam says it. So the next source, Rambam says, Ein podin es hashvuyim b'yeser al demeyan. You're not allowed to redeem captives more than their value, mipnei tikun ha'olam, because we're nervous. We want to make sure, we want to improve the world. What does that mean? Shelo yua oivim rodfin achreim lishvosam. If the non-Jews see that they can make a fortune out of capturing and holding for hostage, for ransom, Jews, then that's going to be the new business. Why does anyone need to go to work? Just go kidnap a Jew, charge an exorbitant fund, and if the Jewish community is willing to pay it, that's a quick way to make a mint. So the Mishnah is teaching us, that's how Rambam's understanding it, that Mishnah is teaching us that if someone is being held hostage, held captive, yes, there's a mitzvah of pidyon shvuyim. We have to redeem him, but we cannot pay an exorbitant fee, because if we pay an exorbitant fee, that's just going to encourage bad behavior. That's going to encourage more kidnapping, more hostage taking, and then the Jewish community is going to go broke. No one will have a dime left to their name because we're going to be spending everything we have on pidyon shvuyim, on redeeming captives. That's a Mishnah. This comes up all the time, unfortunately, whenever there's a discussion about a hostage release or a prisoner exchange. These sources I'm about to share with you, they still come up to this day, and it's so sad. Let's look at the next Gemara. The Gemara is in Gittin, and the Gemara tells us as follows, the following incident. Tanu Rabbanan, a rabbis taught, Ma'aseh Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya. There was a great Tana by the name of Rabbi Yeshua ben Chanana, Shaholach lekrach gadol shebaromi. He went to the major city in Rome, meaning he went to Rome on some type of mission for the Jewish people. He found himself in Rome. Amrulo, while he was there, he heard people say as follows: Tinok echad yesh bebeis ha'asurim. There is a young Jewish boy being held in jail. Yefei and Naim, he's got the most beautiful eyes. The Tov Roy, he's so good looking. The Kutzasav, and he's got the most beautiful head of curly hair. Seduros lo taltalim. It's like they're just beautiful curls, his head of hair. So he hears people saying, Nebuch, there's this beautiful Jewish boy, this adorable, handsome little Jewish boy who's in jail, and he's being held for ransom, and we can't do anything about it. Halach v'amar al Pesach beis asurim. So this Rabbi Yeshua, he decides, I want to do a little investigation into this Jewish prisoner boy. So he goes and he stands right outside the jail, right by the window, right by the door. Amar, and he says, I'm going to give this Jewish prisoner a quiz. He starts by quoting a pasuk from Yeshayahu. He wants to see how proficient is this prisoner in his Tanakh. And he starts a pasuk, but he doesn't complete it. He starts the pasuk, he's saying, Mi nasan l'meshisa Yaakov v'Yisrael lebozazim, which is a question. Mi nasan, meaning who gave permission l'meshisa? What is it? What happened that the Jewish people and Yaakov and Yisrael were given over to bozim, to their plunderers? What was it? For what? What did they do wrong? What was it? Of what crime was it that Klal Yisrael was given over to plunderers, to their robbers, to their oppressors? That's what the pasuk begins with in Yeshayahu. And he stopped there. He didn't finish the pasuk, and he wants to see, could this kid finish the pasuk? Oh no, so Tinok, that little young boy answers by completing the pasuk. And what does the pasuk say in Yeshayahu? Hello Hashem, Zuchatanu lo. It was God who gave us over to our oppressors. Why? Because we sinned against him. Lo avu b'darchav, we did not follow in God's ways. Haloch v'lo shamu b'torah, so we just went walking and we did not keep to the statutes in the Torah. So here it is, he's quoting this obscure pasuk from Yeshayahu that most of us never heard of, and he only quotes half of it, and he wants to see what will happen. And this kid right away jumps in, he recognizes the pasuk and he completes it. Amar, so upon hearing this, Rabbi Yeshua says, Muftachani bo, I am certain about that kid, Shemora Harabi Yisrael, that kid, given the right set of circumstances, will grow up to be a teacher of Torah and a teacher of halacha in Klal Yisrael. Ha'avoda, and he says, I'm taking an oath right now based on the divine service, meaning he's saying, like, I swear on the service of the Beis HaMikdash, Sheni Zaz Mikan, I will not leave here, meaning I won't leave Rome, Ad She'efdenu, until I redeem that kid, B'chol Mamon Sheposken Alav, for all the money, even if it's an exorbitant sum, that his captors ask for him. Amru, and what did they say? Lo Zaz Misham, that's actually what happened. Rabbi Yeshua did not leave Rome, Ad Shepadu B'Mamon Harbe, until he was able to redeem that kid for a fortune. It wasn't too long, Ad Shahara Harabi Yisrael, until this kid was actually teaching halacha and was giving rulings in Klal Yisrael. Umanu, who was this kid? Who did this kid turn into? Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha, one of our greatest Tanoim, Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha. Tragically, he was one of the Asara Haruge Malchus. He was a Kohen, and he was one of the Asara Arugei Malchus who were killed in that period of time after the Romans destroyed the Beis Hamikdash during those Hadrianic decrees. That was Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha was one of those great sages of the Mishnah that was killed at that time. Well, that's his story. That's his origin story. Absolutely wild. Tosfos right there on the daf is bothered by the very obvious question. Is that what did Rabbi Yeshua say? He says, I will pay whatever they ask. Kol mamun shebolam. Even if that means kol mamun poskelam. Whatever sum of money they ask, I'm willing to pay. That means he was even willing to pay an exorbitant ransom fee. But didn't the Mishnah tell us we're not allowed to pay an exorbitant ransom fee? Because that's just going to encourage bad behavior. If that's the case, how did Rabbi Yeshua say he was going to pay this exorbitant fee? And how did he pay this exorbitant fee? So Tosfos is bothered by this, and you'll see Tosfos gives two answers. So next source, Tosfos says right there, Kol mamon sheposken love, whatever sum of money they ask for him, Ki'ika sakanas nefashos, when there is a risk to life, Podin shvuyin yoser al kedei demeyan, then you are allowed to redeem a captive for even more than the market rate, more than the going value, like he quotes from Perek HaSholech. So the first thing he did is he says, we have to clarify our Mishnah. Our Mishnah just said, and it didn't put any restrictions on it. Our Mishnah just says, you never pay more than the going rate to redeem a captive. So Tosfos says, well, that's not exactly true. It depends. If the guy's just being held to be a captive, meaning the captors are saying, this is just business. We're holding the person for business. We're not going to threaten him. We're not going to harm him. We're just holding him for business. So if that's the case, then yeah, then you got to pay the going rate, nothing higher. But if the captors are threatening to kill him, now you have to. There's no end to what could be paid, because we don't have a right to say I don't want to encourage bad behavior and this guy to get killed for it. So the first answer of Tosfos is, how did Rabbi Yeshua say that I'm going to redeem this kid no matter what the price tag is? Well, that's because he says the first answer is because he was in a situation of pikuach nefesh. He had to save the kid's life. His captors were threatening to kill him. Second answer, Inami, what's the second answer? Mishum de muflag b'chachma haya. Because he was an astounding Torah scholar. He could tell this little kid was already a Talmud Chacham. And if we could get him to yeshiva and work with those skills and those talents, the blessings that this kid has, we could turn him into a major Torah scholar. So it sounds like if someone is muflag b'chachma, if someone is a renowned Torah scholar or has the potential to be a renowned Torah scholar, so there too, the Mishnah's rule does not apply. And you can redeem a poda, you can redeem a sheva, you can redeem a captive, even if the price that's being demanded, the ransom that's being demanded, is higher than the going rate. So what do we see from all this? It's a huge, painful discussion about what do we do when someone gets taken captive. Our pasuk said, if we don't follow the Torah, our kids will get taken captive. Well, let's talk about pigeon shvuyim now. Let's talk about redeeming them. So the Mishnah and Gittin told us that we're not allowed to redeem captives if the ransom that's being asked is above the going rate. It's just crazy even that there was a going rate. But he says we're not allowed to pay more than the going rate, because why? Tikkun olam, betterment of the world. It'll encourage bad behavior if we start paying above the going rate. So then the Gemara brought down again, just to review that incident, that Rabbi Yeshua said he found a young Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha in Rome, and he was prepared to pay all the money possible to get him out of there. So Tosfos asked, and he did pay a hefty price. So Tosfos asks, but what happened to the Mishnah? The Mishnah says you're not allowed to pay above market price. So he qualifies it with two ways. He says either it was a case of sakanos nefashos, the kid's life was at risk, and when a kid's life at risk, you are allowed to pay above market rate. Or the answer was he was muflag b'chachma, he was a great Torah scholar, or had the potential to be a great Torah scholar. So there too, you are allowed to pay above market rate. Look what I've got here in the English. This is a famous but a tragic piece of Jewish history. We had a great Rishon who lived at the time of the Bali Tosfos. He was the Rabbi, he was the teacher of the Rush, the great Rabbeinu Asher, who's in the back of all our Gemaras. So who Rabbeinu Asher grew up in Germany. His Rabbi was known as Rav Meir of Rothenburg, Meir of Rothenburg. In the back of the Gemara, his commentary is called Maharam, Morenu Rav Meir, Maharam, as far as name was Baruch, so it was Meir ben Baruch. Maharam Mirottenberg, because the city of his origins was Rottenburg. Look when he lived. He was at the period of the Bali Tosfos. So this is right after Rashi, 1215 to 1293, was a German rabbi, major author of Tosfos commentary Talmud, also known as the Maharam of Rothenburg. In 1286, King Rudolph, was the king of the German Empire, instituted a new persecution of the Jews, declaring them serfs of the treasury, which had the effect of negating their political freedoms. Along with many others, Rav Meir left Germany and with family and followers, but was captured in Lombardy. Lombardy was northern Italy, right near the German border, and was imprisoned in a fortress near Ensisheim in Alsace. Alsace is that area, Germany and France, that area over there. So again, what happened? The Jewish community was put in this terrible position where they were declared to be serfs of the treasury, and the government said they're allowed to be taxed to the nth degree. Basically, you could tax them to death. And it became an intolerable situation. Jews couldn't live in Germany anymore. So many Jews tried to escape, get out of Germany where they could have some breath of freedom, and they weren't going to have to live as slaves to the emperor. So Rav Meir of Rothenburg, the Maharam of Rothenburg, also tried to escape. He tried by going from Germany into Italy. And at that border by Lombardy, that's where he was caught. And he was caught, according to the tradition, he was caught by a Mishumad. There was an apostate who recognized him at the border, and he tipped off the authorities saying, look, that's the famous Rabbi Meir of Rothenburg. He's trying to escape because he doesn't want to pay that tax. You should arrest him, and then you could charge a fortune to get him back from the Jewish community. So tradition has it that a large ransom of 23,000 marks, silver marks, was raised for, but Rav Meir refused it for fear of encouraging the imprisonment of other rabbis. So look where he's putting his money where his mouth is. The Mishnah says you're not allowed to redeem captives for more than they're worth. And Rav Meir of Rothenburg says, yeah, I'm going to apply that to myself. I was taken hostage. They're trying to hold me for ransom. But if the Jewish community pays this ransom, then what's going to happen? The empire is just going to go around capturing every rabbi they can get their hands on. It's going to make it worse for Bnei Israel. So he says it's usher to pay. I'm being held ransom in this fortress. You're not allowed to pay to ransom me because that'll just encourage bad behavior. He died in prison after 7 years. 14 years after his death, a ransom was much smaller, but a smaller ransom was paid for his body by an Alexander ben Shlomo Suskin Wimpin, who was subsequently laid to rest beside the Maharam. They were buried in Worms, Germany, by the way. I'm going to show you at the end here. I have a picture of their graves. It still stands to this day, which is wild. It's thought to be perhaps the oldest Jewish graves that are still standing in Europe. It's incredible that here it was in Worms, Germany, and the Nazis running against the Jews with all their vengeance, trying to erase Jewish history in Europe during the Holocaust, left that cemetery standing. It's absolutely wild. It's become a place of pilgrimage. I'm going to show you a picture of it soon. But I want to give you an account. Here's an account that was written a few hundred years later. One of our great achronim was the Yam Shel Shlomo, written by the Maharshal. Maharshal was Rosh Shlomo Luria, who was one of the leaders of Ashkenazic Jewry living in Poland in the 1500s. He was a contemporary of the Ramah, of Moshe Israelis. So in his commentary that he wrote on the Gemara called Yam Shel Shlomo, here's what he writes in Gittin, because this is the middle of the whole conversation, the whole discussion about redeeming captives. So now that we saw that Gemara that said that if someone was, that incident with Rabbi Yoshua found little Rabbi Yishmael, and he redeemed him for all the money in the world. And Tosfos wanted to know, how could he pay all the money more than the going rate? What about the Mishnah that says you're not allowed to? Tosfos gave two answers. One was Sakanas Nefashos, his life was at risk, and therefore there's no limit. And the second one, it was Muflag B'chachma. He was a great Torah scholar, and therefore Klal Yisrael needs the Torah scholars, so you're allowed to pay more. So having said that, that's where the Yam Shel Shlomo is getting involved, because he's going to want to know, if that's the case, how did the Maharam refuse to be ransomed out? Let's look at this. So it's one paragraph. He writes as follows. Shamati al Maharam Rothenburg. I heard about the Maharam of Rothenburg, Zechron Levracha. Tofus b'migdal Eigzheim. He was held in this fortress of Eigzheim. Again, it might be a different way to spell it. Kamashanim for many years. Basar, and the ruler Tava min akilo sach gadol. He was demanding this exorbitant fund as ransom. Akilos hayrotzim liftoso. They were ready to pay. Lo eniach, and he would not let. Maram of Rothenburg refused. Yamar, he says, he says that they're not allowed to pay if it's more than their value, and they're charging more than my value. So the Yam Shel Shlomo asks, "V'tamani, I don't understand. How could he give such a ruling?" Maram of Rothenburg was the rabbinic leader of that time. So since he was such an astounding Torah giant, there was no one like him in his generation, knowledge of Torah and of saintly behavior. The Shari Liftosa b'chol Mammon Shabolam. You would have been allowed to have redeemed him for all the money in the world, like that Rabbi Yeshua and the Gemara redeemed that little Rabbi Yeshua. Now, if you'll try to tell me, okay, he was such a humble man, so he didn't want to assume the title of being such a great Torah sage. So even if that's true, he should have thought about that by him being imprisoned all those years in jail, how much bittul Torah there would be, both from him and his students who couldn't access him. Asher kasabatzmo, he himself, there are writings that he wrote while he was in jail that were able to be brought to the world, and he writes that there was incredible bittul Torah as a result of this. He was sitting in darkness and in this dank, dark dungeon. Torah va'ora, he had no Torah, he had no spiritual light. And he was wailing that he didn't have his farm, he didn't have access to Jewish books to be involved in learning and answer the shilas, the questions that were coming his way. How did he not care about the fact that so many people needed him? They needed him for guidance. So how did he turn down, "You're not allowed to redeem me"? You have to answer that what was certainly his mindset. So he was confident that if the Jewish community would redeem him, now you would have to fear every ruler throughout Europe is now going to hunt down and say, okay, who's the Gadol Ador? Who's the greatest rabbi in your vicinity? Who's the greatest rabbi in your locale, in your country? Let's find him, capture him, and charge an exorbitant amount. In the same way they paid for Maram and Rothenburg, they'll have to pay for him as well. So that's what he says. Ba'avor rova mammon, and they'll try to hold him hostage to get massive amounts of money. All the money that Jews could collect in the entire diaspora would not be enough because there would be so many captives. And what would end up happening as a result? All the Torah leaders would be sitting in prison, and Bnei Yisrael would be bereft. They wouldn't have any Torah anymore. The Masorah tradition is that after Maram Rothenburg died, that emperor also wanted to grab his student, the Rosh, Rabbeinu Asher. The Rosh found out about it. He ran away to Spain. He went to Toledo, into Spain. That's how they write it in Hebrew. So the Rosh ran to Spain. And he was able to be saved with God's kindness and mercy. And that's why this pious one, Rav Meir of Rothenburg, Rav Meir ben Baruch, that's why he said, Mutav shetovad ma'at chachma, it's better that Bnei Yisrael should lose a little bit of chachma, meaning me, by me not being here, Bnei Yisrael will lose a little bit of wisdom, then then if they buy my freedom, if they ransom me for this exorbitant price, now the emperor of Germany and every other place is going to seize every Torah leader that's out there, and no one's going to have the money to pay for that. So they're all going to sit in jail, and Torah will be lost from Bnei Yisrael. So he took one for the team, so to say. He says, I'm not going to let them redeem me because we don't want to encourage anything of this nature. And this will be the sign proving that he was correct. Sha'az paska oso adavar. That after this whole incident occurred, it stopped. We don't hear any more about this. We don't hear any more that this was happening. We don't hear any more that people rabbis were getting taken hostage and being held for ransom. Sha'az paska oso adavar ashmad litfos chachmei gola. And from that point on, it stopped. And he says it's Rav Meir ben Baruch, the Maram of Rothenburg, we have to thank for that. Here's a picture I have below. I found this online. This is in Worms, Germany. These are the two graves. So on the left is the Maharam of Rothenburg. It's Rav Meir ben Baruch. You can see on the top right corner of the grave, and look at all the stones on top and pieces of paper where people have obviously written requests and visited the graves. It seems like ever since it's been a point of pilgrimage. Anyhow, look here under those stones at the top right corner, you can see it's etched in. You can even see it here. It says Maharam, Mem Hey Resh Mem Sophist. Maharam, that was Rav Meir. Then you see it kind of says here Rav, and then here it says Meir. Can't see much else there. You know what else it says? That's it. So the one on the left is the Maharam of Rothenburg, and then on the one on the right next to him, that was the fellow who basically bought his remains and got the emperor to let him be taken out of the prison and to receive a Jewish burial. His one request was, I want to be buried next to Maharam. I don't want anything else. I don't want to be paid back by the community. I just want to be laying for eternity next to him. And that's what it is. Anybody over the years who has gone to the kever, gone to the grave of Maharam in Rothenburg to daven, they've come into contact with his Redeemer as well. So in a certain sense, he's become immortal through his actions. It's a wild picture. And they say, again, this may be the oldest Jewish cemetery in all of Europe. So just to wrap this all up, we saw three ideas today. The first idea that we saw was about Lavan. And we said about this idea, how do we understand Arami Oved Aviva and Mitzrayim? What connection is there between what Lavan did to the fact that Israel went to Mitzrayim, to Egypt? And the Al-Shech answered that by saying that by switching Rachel and Leah, he inadvertently caused the Jews to go down to Mitzrayim because Yaakov continues treating Yosef especially. But again, had Rachel been married first, everyone would have said, it's okay, he's the Bechor. Now that she wasn't married first, now people, the Shvatim question, why is he treating him so well? That's why they hated him. That's what brings about the Mechira. That's what brings about the sale, which brings Bnei Israel down to Mitzrayim. The second idea that we saw was this idea that even after trying to assimilate, trying to blend in, even becoming an apostate, Jews still, they can never get away from being called Jew, from being pointed out that they're different. And if that's true, we should embrace our uniqueness and think about, okay, if I'm never going to be able to disappear and blend into the crowd, so if I'm going to already be different, let me live as a proud Jew. That's something that should get to each and every one of us. And this final idea that in the Tanchacha, it says that our children will be taken off as prisoners. This very tragic halacha that talks about how much we're allowed to redeem prisoners for, and many times throughout history, how this has played itself out. And here it is, you see it with the Maharam of Rothenburg and this episode. And that picture finally at the end, where the Maharam was very brave. He said, don't ransom me, because he understood the terrible effects that would end up having on Klal Yisrael. He died in prison. It was only years later, 14 years later, someone successfully just succeeded in ransoming his remains. They were charging very, very little for that. It was nowhere near worth what he was alive. And he buried them in Worms in the Jewish cemetery. He's buried right next to it. That was his only request. And they're still standing. And it's a point of pilgrimage for Jews around the world to this very day. I'm going to stop at this point. If there's anything